Kia ora te whānau, iho karaiti ko Andrew Dea. Today we're looking at the Gospel for Sunday the 8th of October 2023, and it's Matthew 21 verses 33 to 46. It's part of Jesus' response to the religious leaders who have challenged him for cleansing the temple and setting up shop right in the middle of the temple courts and healing people and teaching them on a daily basis. So, we pick up the narrative at chapter 21, verse 33. Listen, says Jesus, to another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard, put a fence around it, dug a wine press in it, and built a watchtower. Then he leased it to tenants and went to another country. When the harvest time had come, he sent his slaves to the tenants to collect his produce. But the tenants seized his slaves and beat one, killed another, and stoned another. Again he sent other slaves, more than the first, and they treated them in the same way. Finally, he sent his son to them, saying, "They will respect my son." But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and get his inheritance." So they seized him, threw him out of the vineyard, and killed him. Now, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants? They said to him, "He will put those wretches to a miserable death and lease the vineyard to other tenants who will give him the produce at the harvest time." Jesus said to them, "Have you never read in the scriptures? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it is amazing in our eyes. Therefore I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people that produces the fruits of the kingdom. The one who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, and it will crush anyone on whom it falls." When the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they realized that he was speaking about them. They wanted to arrest him, but they feared the crowds because they regarded him as a prophet. Parables are always about somebody else, aren't they? We find it so easy to recognize other people. Other people's failings, other people's foibles, other people's weaknesses, other people's despicable characteristics. We identify them readily and easily. Aha, we say, we know who this is about. We think so often that we're looking through a window, that we're simply the spectators on the lives of others, that it's other people that we're watching. It's them that is being exposed and writ large. But we don't realize that often, and just as much, that parables are a mirror, and they show us who we really are. Sometimes this has unexpected results. We can look from the outside and make some assumptions that aren't always true. A good one is in fact the parable of the Good Samaritan. Most of us in the West, most of us who live in privileged circumstances, read the parable, and the first thing we're challenged with, if there's any level of honesty for us, is whether we identify with the priest or with the Levite or with the Samaritan who came and rescued this man that had been beaten and left bleeding and dying at the side of the road after having been robbed. Decades ago, Gustavo Gutierrez, who is a Dominican priest from Chile, he's one of the founders of liberation theology. He would talk about leading this study in South America, and as the people who heard the parable, they wouldn't identify with any of the characters that we saw. They identified with the man who'd been robbed and beaten up and left bleeding and dying at the side of the road. Interesting, eh? We can assume so much as we read parables about how they affect other people. But in the account that we had today of the parable of the tenants, we discover that in this account the religious leaders didn't realize at first where they fitted into the story. So often, isn't it, we project our stuff onto others. And they thought, well, maybe they thought that the tenants were the Romans, though they'd never say so. Or that the tenants were the family of the Herod, who had non-Jewish Edomite ancestry, though they would never say so. Until Jesus explained it to them, that they were the cruel tenants deserving a wretched and miserable death. Notice, when they were asked the question what the tenants deserved, the amount of rage and energy that was coming out of the religious leaders. They had no idea at this point that Jesus was talking about them. But when he makes it clear that it's them that he's talking about, they get mad and they want to dispose of him. Now, it's not the first time in Scripture that people failed to recognize themselves, failed to recognize ourselves. There's that story that we find way back in 2 Samuel, which comes to its crunch point in chapter 12. David has spied Bathsheba, I suspect a much younger woman. He's the king, and he takes her and beds her, and she becomes pregnant. The difficulty is that she's married to Uriah the Hittite, one of his mercenaries, an honourable man who fights in his army. And David tries all sorts of ruses to actually have Uriah come back and spend time with his wife, but with no success. And ultimately, he has him killed. It's a despicable story. It's a terrible story. But nothing clicks in David's brain that he's actually really done anything wrong. He has still such a profound sense of entitlement. And months go by, many months. And finally, Nathan the prophet comes to David and he tells him a story. Although David doesn't recognize it as a story, he has a similar kind of reaction as the religious leaders. He's told about a poor man with a single ewe lamb who has it effectively stolen from him by his rich landlord, who decides to use the lamb and cook it for guests that he is entertaining. And David flies into a rage and he says, "This man deserves to die." And Nathan's response, "You are the man." David, up until this point, has no idea, and he's caught on the horns of the parable itself and stands condemned by it. It's easy, isn't it, to imagine that the story always belongs to someone else. We need to allow them to act as a mirror, even in this story, the current one. Clearly, the evil tenants are the first century Jewish leaders who didn't want to give God what was owed. But are they also us? It always bears thinking about. Amen. God bless you.